So we're back with Ken and Mike. We are in the throes of the beginning of the escape from Alcatraz. We've heard a lot of stuff that they were talking about, the preparation, the Mickey Cohen connection. He's back there. It seems like everybody is in a line. They're working away, trying to get those bars off, and they're making their way through that one corridor, which is going to be their gateway off onto the roof. But what I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about, because I was going over the book again this morning, and I always find every time I go back over it again, I always find new things, because after we talk about it and then we, and kind of like, wow, we didn't, we kind of brushed over that, but this is kind of interesting. And Alan West seems to be, he's like, he's almost perfectly written as kind of the, as an antagonist for them. It's like he's like the monkey wrench and things. It's like he's there, but then they're not sure if they can really trust him. He's kind of blabbing around on the yard about, there's one scene where they saw him talking to someone in the yard, because they always kept everybody close together. And they saw him talking to somebody, and he came over back to him, and Frank says, what did you tell him? He grabbed me. He goes, what did you tell him? He goes, well, I told him what we're doing. And he's like, and Frank went through the roof as much as he could without showing anything on the yard. But I want to talk a little bit about how, everybody thought, and, those early reports, how no one really knew anything. No one else in the prison knew. None of the other inmates knew. But the more you read in the book, it kind of reveals that everybody knew what was going on, and they all helped. It was kind of like a communal thing that they were all in part on. We talked a little bit about Bumpy Johnson kind of wrangling all the black inmates, because there was that one situation. I want you to tell me a little bit about that situation when, and we may have talked about it, brushed it over a little bit earlier, when West was digging in his cell and two black inmates were being escorted past his cell by guards, and they noticed he was digging, and they started kind of telling people. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, one of the things about looking and peering into someone else's cell, Whitey Bulger told me that was like a cardinal sin. You didn't do that. So right off the bat, that was something that, one, they should not have been doing. When you walk by a cell, a man's privacy was something that was guarded there at the prison. And so peering into anyone's cell was a violation of that privacy, what little that you had. And so, but glancing over and they see him doing something that's suspicious, as Mike had said before, with the segregation that they had at the prison, I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for them to notify someone and get, some type of, maybe even a reduction in their sentence, maybe even moved off of Alcatraz altogether, some privileges. But it was also a way of getting back at one of the racist, individuals that tormented them. And so it was definitely a way for them to say, hey, we can screw you over now. We're about to pay you back for what you've been doing to us.
Because Alan had a habit of antagonizing them, apparently.
Oh, yes. Even in some of the letters that Whitey wrote me, he talked about how much of a racist individual this guy was, and he also talked about how Wes was so known to brag. Even after the escape had occurred, Whitey said that Wes loved to brag about what he did, what his role in the escape was. He would go around and just talk about it, So he was that kind of an individual that, one, couldn't keep his mouth shut and couldn't keep a secret. And so, I can imagine Frank Morris, along with the other two escapees, my uncles, were just furious with him. And it is one of the reasons why they clamped down on him so much. And they warned him many times, you're not going anywhere without us. You're not going to speak to anyone without us. You go to the bathroom, we're with you. Basically, we're going to hold your hand the whole time.
And I just want to add one more thing about Alan West. After Alcatraz closed in '63, he eventually finds his way to Florida State Prison. And in October of 1972, he fatally stabbed another prisoner over what they considered a racially motivated incident. So, that's the kind of volatility that Alan West had, that he murdered somebody because of race. Now, he later died of, I think it was acute appendicitis. So he didn't live I think he was 47 or 49 when he died. But so that's what they had to contend with back in 62 when they were planning their escape, that West could be triggered very easily. And he was very volatile. And Whitey had nothing good to say about him. He didn't trust him. He didn't think much of him. He thought he was a coward. Yeah, it was all negative for Whitey Bulger. He was not a well-liked man. But
yeah,
he was indispensable in the escape. We have to give him the proper recognition for what he did do. He did make painting the top of the cell block, which we talked in the previous episode, possible because of his ability to do general work around the prison. He was the one that found the files and the saw blades that really launched the escape and the escape plan in earnest. And he did watch for the guards when Frank Morris was doing his part of the digging, his part of the preparation. So without West, the escape wouldn't have happened. So he was needed, despite his obvious flaws and problems that they had to deal with along the way.
It sounds like the entire inmates, everybody, because there's a lot of sections of the book where a lot of other inmates were contributing to this escape and the preparation of it. I mean, there was this one section where I guess a Robert Scheibling. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Robert Scheibling.
Yeah, tell me a little about him, because I was fascinated about how he was contributing, and everybody had like a little piece that they were contributing, and his was pretty crucial.
Well, he claims that he was with them a lot during the planning session of when they would sit down for meals together in the kitchen dining area. He was not a part of the plan. He didn't assist directly with the escape plan, but he was contributing his thoughts and ideas with the others. And he says that they talked about it rather openly with each other. Whereas I have another source that said that they spoke in code when they were at the table. They wouldn't say it outright, like, how's the digging going? How the dummy head's going? They would speak in code so nobody would, understand what they were really talking about. So something was said at the tables, and he claimed to be a part of that. But his more direct contribution was he knew that that in the local newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, that they used to have the tide reports in the paper because, San Francisco Bay, there's a lot of fishermen, a lot of recreational types of activities on the water. So the locals need to know what the tides are like and what the conditions and the weather and so forth. So the Chronicle would put that in the paper. Well, one of the things he claimed was that newspapers were not supposed to be in the exercise yard. That was forbidden because the prison really monitored what the inmates knew of the outside world. They had the radios in their cells where they can listen to music. And that was pretty much it. They didn't have access to news, and they didn't have local newspapers available to them. They had magazines that they can get, which you might indirectly get some information on the outside, and letters from home, of course, but not a lot. So he was aware of one guard who would have his lunch in the yard, and he would leave his paper behind. He wouldn't bring it with him, which he should have done. And so Robert would go when no one was looking, he'd grab the paper, and then he said that he fed that information to John about what the tides were like, so that on the night of the escape, they knew what the conditions were supposed to be. So that was one of his contributions to the escape.
Yeah. No, that's it's pretty significant knowing what the tides are. I mean, because that could change a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, and Whitey wrote many times about how that, I used to always believe too, it was just a couple of people who knew about the escape as it was being planned and executed. But he indicated that there were a huge amount of people that the night of the escape, as they were leaving, all of these people are like, and especially him, he said, I laid in bed and stared up at the ceiling, just anticipating, that they were going to get called to, but he was, I guess they were all like praying and hoping that these men were going to escape. And he even makes a comment one time that it wasn't just those three that were escaping. Everybody in Alcatraz who knew about the escape was escaping with them. So it was a big participation as far as knowledge wise. You know, very few people probably contributed other than maybe like their raincoats. But there were quite a few people who knew about it.
Well,
and it's amazing that they kept it all quiet.
Well,
you know,
that's my question. Like, why did they keep it quiet, and why didn't they want to escape with them? Like, why were they willing to help them and not rat on them?
I think, well, one, a lot of people thought, well, if there was a successful escape, that would close the prison down, and which then would force everyone into the mainland to other prisons. The thing about Alcatraz was it was so isolated. Very few people had access to visitors. And then very few people had access to any lawyers or representation, especially the African-American group. Oh my gosh. I mean, the white people, had a few, but the black inmates had probably absolutely none. And so getting to a regular prison gave you a lot of access to other things that you didn't have at Alcatraz. And so I actually kind of believe that they thought, oh, well, this is going to close the prison down, even though they probably didn't know it was already in the works anyway. It was going to be shut down, I believe, regardless, even if the escape never happened. Mm. But I believe that they were really like Whitey said, it wasn't like just the three of them getting off. It was everyone looking into the future going, we're all going to get off this island, if we can have a successful escape. Because to be honest with you, not everybody can go, right? I mean, if everybody walked out of their cell,
right?
That's not going to be a successful escape. So, they saw down the future what they thought what they were going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And two, it was a way of sticking it to them, to these guards and everybody who had tormented them for all this time. So
but they didn't they invite Whitey though? And then he kind of turned it down. He thought about it and then. Talk a little about that, because I thought that was interesting.
Ken?
Well, yeah. So go ahead, Mike. You jump in on this one.
Well, he was a part of the planning. We talked previously about helping them with getting acclimatized to the cold. He taught them about the tricks of using the towels at night and laying on the cement floors, and getting used to the cold water. We talked about how about the importance of creating the wetsuits. How to breathe and swim in the water. If you're in the water, how you don't panic, and just ways that you work with the water, because he was a scuba diver, he was a licensed scuba diver. He helped them get supplies and materials. He watched, he kind of watched their backs to make sure there was no trouble coming their way. Like in the Clint Eastwood movie, there's a scene, it's a fictitious scene, but this one of the inmates is going after Frank Morris, and one of the inmates saying, hey, so-and-so is coming after you, get ready. And, he almost gets knifed to death. But this, so other inmates had to watch each other's backs, because you can't know everything. So he was part of the inner circle of what was happening. He was fully aware of the escape. And one of the things I was going to mention was the night of the escape, when they're on the roof, they take off, or they push off the lid that's over the top of the vent on the roof, and it makes a large thud on the roof. And then the seagulls that are there start flying away. They start squawking, making noise. If you've heard seagulls, they can be pretty loud, and especially at nighttime when it's quiet. It's really loud. And so Whitey said he and other inmates who were listening, who were waiting to see what was going to happen, start banging on their cells and banging on their beds to make noise to distract the guards from, investigating what that noise was. And it wasn't just Whitey. He said other inmates were doing that too. So they were also aware and also listening for what was happening. And one inmate even said that's when he thought they got caught. Then when he heard the thud, that was it. The escape's over. And he was very worried that, or they could have been shot possibly, for trying to escape. So yeah, a lot of inmates were involved. But for Whitey, I think he just kind of did the math in his head. And he said, the chances of success are very slim. Mm-hmm. If we are caught outside, if the guards see us trying to escape, orders of shoot to kill. And I think he thought he'd have a better chance trying to pursue other means of escape. Ken had talked about this in a few episodes ago when Whitey was in Georgia. He tried to escape from Georgia federal prison and was caught. And that's what sent him to Alcatraz, he and Frank Morris. So Whitey did have a desire to escape, but I think he thought the odds were too high, and he just decided, I'm not going to risk it. I'll help you guys every way I can. I'm not going to go with you.
Well, and two, you have to think about, this was not a one-man operation. So if you invited Whitey, then you also had to have someone that was next to him that could watch while he was digging. So now it's not just Whitey, it's whoever else is beside him. And two, I don't even believe he was even in that same area that they were in. So in order for him, even after he got out of his cell, or dug out the back, if he was involved, it was going to go with him, they had somehow were going to have to get him his head, right, to stick in his bed. I mean, John and Clarence are the ones who made all the heads. So, logistically, it wasn't really feasible for him to go. But he also mentioned, just as Mike said, he didn't hold a lot of success for it. Even a lot of the prisoners didn't think that it was a doable thing. And I believe that, and that's probably true up front, because as they're preparing to dig through their holes, the original plan, and I still believe the original plan that they thought that they were going to be doing, was they were going to create a raft, which was the one they left behind, the original one. And the plan was to go down to the water and try to make it over to Angel Island. And then from there, steal a car and try to make it up to the Canadian border. And so a lot of people probably didn't think that was a doable, scenario. I mean, it was just too many things but then once, you have Mickey Cohen and you have some other changes to the plan that occur, I'm sure that, like Whitey and some of the other people thought, this is probably a doable thing after all, because now we have help on the outside.
Well, that's my next question. Why was Mickey Cohen so willing to help them?
I have really,
I know, but we didn't. We ended it on
I really thought about why he was motivated to help the John and Clarence and Frank Morris. To my knowledge, he never even had met Frank Morris before. We do have a lot of circumstantial evidence that he had definitely met the ANGLIN brothers before, and that he was involved, or they were going to be involved with his drug operation that was coming out of Mexico and out of South America. I really believe he was motivated for other reasons than just helping John and Clarence. I mean, I go back to and I talked about this last night in a book signing that I was doing. Someone asked me this very question: why would Mickey Cohen be involved in this? And you have to kind of go back and look at, well, when he bonds out, why in the world would the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, why would someone at that level sign a bond for someone to get out of prison? I just couldn't fathom, and I started kind of thinking, so if the Kennedys actually are the ones who put him into Alcatraz, and his lawyer had gone to a federal judge, in San Francisco, local federal judge, and he's the one who signs the bond. Well, if the Kennedys didn't like what just occurred, they could have appealed the case, and which meant that Mickey would have stayed in Alcatraz, and it would have got appealed and appealed and appealed until it eventually makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, if it ever went that far. But when you involve the Supreme Court at the very beginning, there are no appeals. There's no, I mean, where are you going to go? So once the Chief Justice is the one who signs this, that's case closed for him getting out. And I still can't wrap my head around, why would he be involved in wanting to help a convicted criminal get out of prison?
Well, I think maybe they could have got him out. Maybe they were trying to flip him or get information from him, because he was a wealth of information. They only had him in there for tax evasion.
Right.
Maybe they, his lawyer cut him a deal saying, hey, listen, maybe he's can give them some information, or the FBI or the Kennedys thought, well, he's a valuable asset to us.
Right.
Let's throw him, a bone and see if he'll play ball with us. And they may have questioned him thinking that. And then that's probably why he ended up back in.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
I'm speculating, but just thinking along the lines that doesn't make sense, like you said, for
right.
Justice Warren to sign his bail thing. I don't, I mean,
Well, I mean, yeah, I can understand it. Yeah, if they went to a local federal judge and he's the one who signs it, and they're going to, work with them. But is it possible that maybe they were doing this and he was doing them a favor? I mean, was it something that they wanted him to do? And you ask yourself, okay, if he knew he was going to be coming back, why did he come back? I mean, why would you not just like take the advice that Whitey Bulger gave him and said he had the perfect opportunity to flee the country. He could have took any cash that he had with him or had it transferred down, but he could have fled the country. He could have gone into Brazil, just as Whitey Bulger told him to do, and he could have lived the rest of his life there, and probably continued on whatever he was doing. So I still believe there was more to the story than what you're reading in the FBI files about why he got out and why he came back. He did undoubtedly have a motive to help them. One of the things that really struck me kind of odd was that as soon as Mickey Cohen shows up to Alcatraz, Clarence writes a very strange letter to his family, and we have the letter. Now they've only been gone in prison for maybe 3, maybe pushing 4 years, not quite 4 at that time, maybe 3. And Clarence writes home and asks his mom to send him a picture of the house. Yeah. And in the letter, he states, when me and John gets out, we're afraid we won't be able to recognize the house. When I remember the house for the first time in the late 60s, early 70s, it's the exact same house that when they built it. I mean, these people had no money to remodel their house on a yearly basis. Why in the world would Clarence need a photo of the house? And then that photo is not listed as being in all of the photos and the letters that were left behind that they, lost in the pouch. That's one of the photos that's not there. So what happened to that photo? Where did it go? Yeah. Why did Mickey Cohen take it with him? Mm-hmm. If it wasn't to go down and to meet with Robert Anglin or Uncle Man, or either he had someone else go there. I mean, if you were going to go meet with someone that you had never been to their house before, would you not want to make sure you were at the correct house? Sure.
Especially in something like this.
Exactly.
You don't want to be knocking on the wrong door.
I mean, he was motivated to help the Anglin brothers either because of their past relationship, or he saw that there was something that was being promised to him. One of the things he loved more than anything, and Mike can attest to this, was his girlfriend Candy Barr. I mean, he did everything he could to try to win her over, try to marry her. She wouldn't do it. When she was up on drug charges, he hides her out in Mexico at his farm, gives her money, gives her a new ID. I mean, he just loved this lady to death. Is it possibility that there was something promised? Because she did get pardoned in the end. The governor of Texas does pardon her.
Right. And I always thought that was suspicious. Like, why did they pardon her? So maybe he did.
I mean,
make a deal.
If he agreed to do some things and he got this in return, I mean, I don't believe that if he got out and it was just solely by luck, that he would have waited around to go back to prison. I mean, any person in his position, I personally believe he would have fled the country. But there was a reason why he wasn't doing it.
Yeah, right. At that point, I could see Bobby Kennedy saying, "Yeah, bring him out, see if we can get something. But if he doesn't give us anything, we're putting him back in."
And that's very possible. That's very possible what could have been happening. So.
Well, he has a case. He did have his appeal case, and they did do that. And in the end, his appeals were denied. All the charges that they found him guilty on, they upheld the conviction against him, and then they sent it back. So judicially, that's why he goes back to Alcatraz.
But doesn't most prisoners today, if you're convicted of something, I mean, if you file for appeal, you don't get out. You stay in prison while the appeal is being heard. And then if it's overturned, then you get out. It's not like, I mean, that's a very weird situation that they allow him to leave.
Yeah. I mean, usually they're filing their appeals behind bars, depending, but it also depends on the crime. You know, if it's a violent crime or but his was tax evasion. So there may have been, correct? Am I correct that he was in there for tax evasion?
It was, but they were actually trying to get him on other charges. I mean,
I know.
They tried to get him on murder because he was involved in a murder. So that was the only thing they could, at that time, get things to stick upon these criminal mob bosses.
And then they could have been letting him out to see if he reconnected with people or did something else that they could kind of charge him further on. You know, I mean, you know, that's sometimes they let people out just to see and, you know, let them loose and see who they connect to. They follow him. I'm sure they were surveilling him to a degree.
Well, either Mickey Cohen himself, or he had someone who went to Uncle Man in Ruskin that made contact with him, because, you know, later on in the story, we'll eventually get to it when we get to Alfred. Uncle Man is the one who tells Alfred that Mickey Cohen is the one who set this up. And you go, okay, Uncle Man is someone who lives in a rural city in Ruskin, Florida, that has no contact with anybody. How did he know Mickey Cohen?
Yeah.
I mean, why would he have even said that name?
Right. That's the thing. He wouldn't.
No,
that doesn't make any sense.
He would not have said that. No. And so it definitely transpired, because even after Mickey comes back, after being gone for 7 months, we talked about this in one of the other podcasts, you know, the whole plan changes. It goes into this retro fast mode. You know, we can't use the raft that we had. We now need this new raft. And so it was even Wes talks about, there was they made a new raft because John decided this one wasn't going to work. And so, you know, you see this fast-paced process that occurs, and then all of a sudden the escape occurs just weeks after Mickey Cohen returns to Alcatraz.
Yeah.
So to me, you cannot make me believe that's a coincidence.
No, I don't think there are any coincidences with it. There's too many balls in the air there, I think. And they're all planners. They're all planners. All these guys are planners. Criminals like this, like, you know, organized crime guys. You had your brother, your uncles. They've been scheming and planning ever since they were kids. So they always had a plan. And I thought that was really interesting. And then, like, when they designed the heads, they gave them different names. Talk a little bit about that. And there were names that only they would know.
Well, there was
they all had meanings behind them.
Yes. Well, one of the things that Uncle Man did talk about one time to a skip tracer, which I never really knew what a skip tracer was. I'll get that out in a minute. But for some reason, he gave this interview, which he talks about how the brothers, as they grew up, were he called them as thick as thieves. They were very close. They had secret codes that they used between each other. They could communicate without actually saying anything. They could make marks. They would make phone calls. They would let it ring X amount of time, hang up, and then they'd do it again so many times, and each one meant things. So they had ways of making those type calls. And then they used aliases. Like a lot of times Clarence went by, he used an alias of Carl Miller, which was one of his cousins. But they also gave each other names. Like when Alfred was on the run from a previous escape before the bank robbery, they referred to him as Oink. So believe it or not, that's one of the heads that they made. Mm-hmm. So you see these this code system that they were using. Even like I blow my mind about. So every letter that comes in and out of a prison, especially Atlanta or Alcatraz, is scanned and reviewed by a prison guard. How in the world they communicated to Alfred while it was doing planning, that they were planning an escape from Alcatraz, because they let him know, hey, we're planning this escape from Alcatraz, and Alfred didn't think that it was going to be successful. He didn't hold a lot of hope out for it. But so they had a way of communicating that a guard probably looked at it and thought, oh, it's a couple of scribbled lines, or it was some drip, that didn't mean anything to them, but it meant something to Alfred. And so that's how they communicated. And so you can see when they built these heads that they probably took it as a joke, and they named them after each one of their childhood nicknames that they would give each other.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really interesting. But it just tells you how genius they are and how they were doing it. I can't remember if we talked about Frank Morris and the accordion. Did we talk about that yet? Because I thought that was an interesting story, and why because as you guys were telling us, they would kind of plan their digging around the music time when the other inmates were playing their instruments or whatever, harmonica, guitars, and all that kind of stuff. And obviously we all know now that the inmates were in on it, and they would be doing this so these guys could do it to run cover for sound. But then I was reading about when, because Frank Morris didn't know how to play the accordion, but he ordered one. The fact that he was able to get an accordion sent to him, something unwieldy like that. And just what do you know about that? And then did that have some sort of, because I was also reading, did it have a dual purpose? Were they going to use it for something else additional for him to just kind of make noise while they're digging?
So yeah, like you said, he ordered an accordion, and there was a band on the island called the Rock Islanders. So everybody who could play an instrument was a part of that. And actually, Al Capone, he was there years earlier. He wasn't there at the same time as the brothers, but he actually learned how to play the harmonica, and he was part of the Rock Islanders. So he had some musical talent, which I thought interesting. This notorious mobster playing a harmonica with a band, but he did. But for Frank Morris, yeah, he sort of self-taught to play the accordion. And later on, when the escape happens, he had also ordered a concertina. And a concertina is, it's the handheld version of an accordion. You pull it back, you go back and forth, and you make music. It's a bellow system, just like an accordion. And I suspect what he did was that he ordered the accordion first because of the bellows. And the reason the bellows are important because it pumps air. That's how the accordion or concertina works. Well, when they needed it for the raft, because when they got to the water's edge, they needed to inflate that raft as quickly as possible, because the longer they're sitting there at the water's edge, the more likely they're going to get spotted by a guard and then possibly get shot at. Or if they know they're trying to escape, call out the boats, and the boats come and pick them up, and then the escape's over. So I think for Morris, I suspect that he was initially starting with the accordion, because that's more commonly known as a musical instrument. But then he realized how unwieldy it is. These things are big and heavy and clunky and hard to move. Huge. And if you're trying to, hop over fences and run down hills, and, this thing is not going to work with you very well. So somehow later he understands what a concertina is. So he uses the accordion just under the premise of, I'm learning how to play music with everyone else. So it sort of establishes his desire to learn how to play an instrument. And then later, when he had the concertina, well, then it's just smaller, and it's essentially the same thing. Well, the concertina is a much better instrument to use for inflating purposes. So when they got to the water's edge, after they had broken out of the prison, they had converted it into a pump. So they're pushing with the concertina, and they're inflating the raft very quickly, much faster than if they had just used, their mouths to blow it open like a balloon kind of a thing. It would have taken a lot longer. And so, because the concertina, they left it behind. They didn't need it after they had used it for the raft. And so it became a tool for them to get to the boat as quickly as they possibly could. So that's the purpose that it served.
Yeah, no, I thought that was genius. And if you look at those pumps that you have for like the rafts now, they kind of look like a little concertina, the ones you just put your foot on.
Yeah.
So
and that's exactly, the principle is exact. So again, they were planners. They were thinking that a musical instrument that no one would think twice about, that the inmates were encouraged to learn how to play an instrument as sort of a pacification process of, we'll let you play at this time of the day for several hours. And so he first the accordion, then later the concertina. They wouldn't even think twice about it. It's like, oh, great, you're playing an instrument. Good. Not realizing that this is a tool for escape. So
Well, and it's the same way with the paintings, that John and Clarence did. They order art supplies, and they're now in their cells painting. John's painting his girlfriend and her sister, and Clarence is painting a rock scene with water crashing on it, and they're using that as a ruse to get the paint, and they're at the same time painting the dummy heads. John's figuring out the flesh tone paint colors that he needs, which he paints around, for the face, and now he's painting that onto the dummy heads. So they're planning as they're doing these activities that to a guard as they're walking by, they're thinking, oh, John's learning how to paint. And, that was something that even Warden Blackwell, when they do send the paintings home to their mom and dad, he comments on how great of a painter, an artist that John was. He's like, oh, he was really good. It's like, okay, he was very good at fooling you and then believing that he was painting his girlfriends, and because he missed her, and what he did, but he was using that as a way to get paint.
Cool. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to go to the morning of June 11th, 1962. And we won't get through all of it, but I want to start kind of doing a timeline, because I think we've set up, and this is episode what? 9 that we're on now. And I think we've set up the stage for all this. And I want to kind of get into the beat by beat of that day. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what happened on the morning of June, if you know this, June 11th, 1962, leading up to what they had to do and what they were planning, all the things they did in order to get themselves out of the prison on that shoreline, and waiting, and all the stuff that they were seeing, as far as not even sure if there's going to be a boat out there, because they had doubts that the boat. John was the only one who was convinced the boat was going to be there. Frank wasn't sure if it was going to be there. Clarence, I'm sure, was with John and believed in John. But let's just go from that morning and what happened, and take us through it and see how far we can get.
Well, I can definitely believe that, John and Clarence had a lot of faith in Mickey Cohen. Undoubtedly, Mickey, when he came back, he gave them a time frame of, the boat's going to be at this location for X amount of evenings, starting from this time frame to this time frame. And, you have to make sure that you have executed the plan and you're ready to go within that time frame. I mean, the boat can't come out there and stay every single night for months. That would definitely have been too suspicious. Someone would have eventually spotted it and questioned why this boat's out there every evening. That morning, I believe that when they got up that morning, they knew that was the day for some reason. Like I said, there's a short time frame. They might have had 3 days at the max, maybe even 2 days.
I just want to jump in here real quick.
Okay.
Robert Scheiblein, we just talked about him a few moments ago. He does recount that what the brothers, because June 11th is a Monday, and Robert Scheiblein said, and when the inmates were in the exercise yard, they only did it on the weekends. It was during the week, they were not in the exercise yard unless it was like a holiday, like the 4th of July or Memorial Day or something, for a special day. Otherwise, it was you didn't go out until only Saturday and Sunday. So Robert Scheiblein said that on Saturday and Sunday, the weekend, that they were saying their goodbyes.
Mm-hmm.
And him being one of them, because he was privy to their plans, according to him. And so they knew that time was coming, and so they wanted to let them know, for those that they trusted, we're leaving on Monday. We're going out. We're getting out. So they did have that information, and they did pass it along to the inmates, and he being one of them. So they were fully aware of, like Ken said, after Mickey Cohen comes back, everything is kind of firmed. The plans are firmed up. They have the timeline. one of the things that the boat would do to draw attention to itself was it was like a fishing type boat. So the lights would go on for a moment and then the lights would go dark. And a few minutes later they'd go on, so they weren't like constantly shining the lights, but enough where it would attract attention, but not too much attention. It was kind of trying to walk in that tightrope of we're here, but we don't want to be too obvious about it so that, the Coast Guard investigates or something. So yeah, they were definitely telling the inmates that they were going to go out very, very soon. So.
Well, and two, so you're thinking, as Mike said, it occurs on a Monday, the day before, which is Sunday, they're allowed into the yard. They're setting up on those steps, which we have a picture, believe it or not, in April. I believe that's them, that you can see the very highest point. Me and Mike have actually set at that point, and you can see perfectly over into the bay, and you can see Marina Green, and so you can see the marina. And who's to say it's very possible that the boat that they were going to get on was actually kind of, motoring around out there. They could have actually seen it along with Mickey Cohen at that time. He's still there now. He is there. And it could have been a confirmation. Okay, the boat is there. It's going to be there, tonight, and it's going to be there tomorrow night and one more night. Who knows how many nights it was there. But I do believe that it was something that they could only do for a short period of time. And so, yeah, I could see where they said their goodbyes, like Mike said, they were saying their goodbyes to everybody. But when they wake up on Monday morning, I can almost, the anticipation is their adrenaline is probably already started pumping right then. It would be in me. I would be anticipating, all the final preparations that I had to do. And that's why it's always dumbfounded me why Wes would wait until the last minute to make sure he could get out of his cell. He had a head that was behind his wall that he could have easily, and he also had a fake grill that was waiting there. So he could have easily gone out anytime. He didn't have to wait until that night to go, okay, I've got this one little section that I think I can easily knock out,
And I just want to jump in one thing just to clarify. For John and Clarence and Morris, they dug out of the back of their cell weeks before the escape, and they would be on top of the cell block to do, all their preparations. Well, Wes didn't do that. He dug up to a certain point, and then on April 25th, that's when he stopped digging, thinking, well, I'll finish the rest, when I need to get out. And the reason he did that was because he was working on top of the cell block, painting and doing maintenance work on top of there. That's when he was doing his preparation parts of the escape. One of his jobs was, for example, was the paddles, the wood paddles, one of them being found after the escape floating in the water. That was one of the things that he did. And probably also help, with the rafts that were being constructed. He would do it during the working hours. So he didn't have to do it at nighttime like the brothers did and Frank Morris did. So he could stop.
You almost would have thought he would have wanted to make sure that you could get out of the cell. It's like, do you really want to? And because it played out to be true according to Wes, right? He tries to finish it at the last moment, and he couldn't get out. So it's almost kind of like, would you really chance that? You prepared everything else. Mm-hmm. Are you really going to wait to the last minute to see whether or not you can get out of your cell?
Unless they didn't tell him the day that they were leaving.
I still believe
based upon the way Frank
didn't tell him.
Based upon the way Frank felt about him, I think that that's a plausible thing, because I don't think he didn't like him. He didn't trust him.
And clearly he didn't know about some of the items that they used in the escape. As I don't want to jump too far ahead because I want us to kind of talk about it as we go through, and we'll eventually get to it, and I'll explain what I'm saying. But I can almost prove that he was never going to go to begin with, and he was never a part of that last piece. And as we get into more, I'll tell you why when we get to that point. But as far as that morning, oh my gosh, can you imagine the excitement that they were sitting here going, okay, we've got to make sure everything is in order, So as like Mike said, Wes has access to the top, so I'm sure he's probably getting prepared for everything. And yeah, I can just imagine how they felt that day, you know. And a strange thing happens that very day too, that very few people, and we didn't even know until in 2012, when we were out for the 50th anniversary and we were working with the marshal. My grandmother on June the 11th wrote a letter to Clarence, the very last letter to ever be written to one of her sons. She, for some reason, decides to write him a letter. It's dated June the 11th, 1962. She mails it and it's postmarked at the Tampa, post office that night at 8 o'clock. They're, of course, in the water by that time. By the time the letter actually reaches, Alcatraz, they're long gone. But here she is writing her son on the day that they're getting ready to leave. How crazy is that?
That's crazy. But mother's intuition, she might have felt something.
I guess.
She might have felt
the crazy
something.
thing is no one knew that it ever happened because none of the letters were ever sent back to the family, including that one. Okay. So we didn't know about it until 2012 when we're getting ready to go to the island and we're meeting with U.S. Marshal Dykes at the time. And he says, I want to, give y'all something I bet y'all probably never knew even existed. And so he pulls out, not their original for some reason, he gives us a photocopy. He had scanned it. He scanned the letter in and he also scanned the envelope that it was mailed in. And so you can, we have it. You can see when it was postmarked and everything and then read the letter. But for some reason, no one even knew that had occurred. That's the first time we ever found out was in 2012 that she wrote a letter.
What did the letter say? What did the letter say?
It was a general type letter about, how are you doing? We miss you. It did talk about, believe it or not, this is kind of a really strange, about his youngest sister who was getting married, who at the time was out in San Francisco participating in the escape. And she, in the letter, it was talking about she was going to be getting married that Saturday. So after the escape, she had to go all the way back to Ruskin to get married that Saturday evening at the house. And so it was a very interesting, cordial type kind of letter that she typically would write her children. But it was the only letter we've ever been able to read that came from a family member to them. All of the other letters that the family wrote them, we have never been able to read them. The FBI still has them, refuses to give them back. We only were allowed to read this one letter. So I can't even imagine what the other letters sounded like, but it probably sounded a lot like what she wrote in that last letter.
Did you guys? I would imagine you guys did a FOIA request and they denied it.
Well, they won't even talk to us about them. And in fact, the one time that I did get one of the U.S. Marshals to talk about it, he said, "Oh, well, we they've been misplaced and no one knows where they're at now." And I was like, "Okay, well then, how did you get this one? How did you make a copy of the one that you gave me in 2012 if you didn't know where they were at?" And they just refused to talk to us about it. So, and we've requested it from the FBI multiple times. Like I said, two congressmen, one senator, along with me, have written the FBI in Washington. They directed us to the field office in San Francisco. They completely refused to respond to either one of us, the two congressmen, the one senator, and myself. And that's been 3 years. We've been trying to get them to reply. They will not even respond to us. Letter, phone call, nothing. They refuse to talk about it. So, go figure. Yeah. I don't know. What is in those letters that Uncle Man probably wrote them because Uncle Man was living with my grandparents at that time with his wife. And my grandmother and grandfather could not read or write. So my Uncle Man's wife, Billy, is the one who wrote the letters for my grandmother. So every letter that she wrote it for her and mailed it. So there's no telling what Uncle Man told them in one of the letters. What if he had said, hey, we had a friend of yours, Mickey Cohen, show up at the house, or we had a friend of yours show. Who knows what could have been said that could back up what we're now telling
Right.
you. So.
Yeah, I mean, but this time, at this point, so many years after, I mean, maybe like Mike, you said at one point that the case is supposed to be kind of go completely off the charts, like what, in another 9 years?
Yeah, when they turn 99, that's when the U.S. Marshals will close the case. So it's still an open investigation for the U.S. Marshals at this point.
Yeah. And that's how they can, so if they do have it, they're not going to give it to you.
But I'm kind of like Mike, so why would they give us the paintings if those were involved in the escape? I mean, why would you give me those, but you turn around and say, well, we're not going to give you the letters nor the photos of all the family members because they're evidence of what?
Exactly.
And then why wouldn't you give me the letter that my grandmother wrote, the last one, because clearly that came in after they escaped, right? So it couldn't have been part of the pouch because there's no way it could have made it there in time,
Right?
Like overnight before they actually walked out the cells. So why are you keeping that letter? What is it about these letters that they do not want us to have? I mean, you can only question, why would you not want to give back personal items to the family?
Because they don't have to. I mean, it's like we've FOIA request FBI files all the time, stuck with closed cases, cases that are cold that they're not investigating. But if,
I mean, right now, Laura, our forensic criminologist who works on death row in San Quentin, she has power of attorney from some of the serial killers on their cases. And that means she's got all the discovery. They won't give her the files. She has power of attorney. She's like, I have power of attorney. You have to give it to me. And there's 2 cases that they won't do it. They've given her many of the others, but there's just 2 particular ones.
And she's working with law enforcement to try to close out some of these cases.
Yeah,
So
I don't know. But I think you're right, Ken. I think if there was nothing egregious in them or potentially maybe backing your story up, they would just give them to you. What's the point? It's just letters from your family.
Unless they don't have them in their
Well, there's there's the photograph that the day after, on June 12th, when the escape was discovered, the FBI, of course, came to the island. They took over the investigation and trying to round up the escapees. And so they were taking photographs of the different parts of the prison and on the island of where where they were interacting with the inmates with the escape part. And of course, she took a picture of their cells, which they're in the
very
book.
next morning.
And there's a stack on John's. There's like a little desk, tabletop kind of a thing in the cells where they can write letters or just keep things on. And there's a stack about this thick. Turn my hand here. This thick of letters in John's cell. That there's probably a good 15 or 20 letters in that stack that have never been accounted for. Because when the FBI sent back their personal items, it was just a few little things that were innocuous, like shaving kits and toothbrushes and things like that.
Pair of glasses and the paintings.
Yeah, just and it's just a handful of things and the paintings. Well, the letters were never returned. Nope. Where did those letters go? They vanished. They're holding on. So probably one of those letters was the one that the mother sent that was just added to it and then eventually was released to the family.
Well, and 2, if you look on top of the, this is something that when I first saw the in that photograph, those letters, up on top of it is it looks like a raincoat sleeve, like the sleeve of a raincoat laying on top of them. And so I took a picture of just the raincoat sleeve. And I sent it to one of the U.S. Marshals and also to Michael Esslinger, because they, believe it or not, they were the 2 people that have actually seen the pouch that was discovered in the water a couple of days later, and the items that were inside of the pouch. They actually saw them, and then all of a sudden it was at one of the archives, and then all of a sudden, they keep saying now, well, we don't know what happened to them, so. But I showed him that pouch, that raincoat sleeve that was on top, because that's what it was made out of. And he said, yeah, that's very similar to what I saw. But my question that I've always asked is, okay, here's a raincoat sleeve in John's cell up on top of a stack of letters. And in those letters, okay, are probably photos, right? You know, because they said they found letters in the pouch. How is it that John left all that behind, but yet it's found a few days later in the San Francisco Bay? How is that possible?
Mm.
And
do you think that pouch that you saw in the cell that they have staged there, that's the right one? Could they have replicated it just for a display purposes?
No, well, so this was the very next morning that, you know, is like Mike said, the FBI comes in like the next day and they take the case over. I mean, they, you know, I'm sure right off the bat, it was the guards and the warden at the time was in charge of what was happening. But as soon as the FBI showed up, everything is turned over to them. This is a federal case. And that's one of the first things they do is they photograph everything just as a crime scene before anything's moved. No one's touched anything. All their clothes are still laying on their beds. That's the reason why I'm saying they snuck out of their cell naked. The only thing they had on was their underwear, undoubtedly. Because in John's cell, you can still see his pants with his belt laying on the bed. All of his shirts. So he didn't take anything with him. He had clothes waiting for him that they were going to wear. That proves that and he even said this to another prisoner, you know, there's a possibility we're going to take alternate clothes and darken them black so that we're not seen, as you know, we're less likely to be seen. So that was already something that was in the planning stage. But so they come in there and here are all these letters, okay, and you've got all the information that's inside the letters, the photos, because that's what happens when you get and what really kind of made me think that something was strange was that one of the items that they find days later in the pouch as they go through it is a receipt for made out to Clarence where his mom had sent him $5. Okay. So this is how it would definitely happen. My grandmother would have written a letter to Clarence, put $5 bill in there. She didn't have checks at that time. They didn't do banks. It was cash. And as soon as the letter arrives at Alcatraz, you know, they go through every letter. They would have taken the $5 because the inmates were not allowed to actually have cash. They had an account. They deposited that into his account, write him a receipt, goes inside of the letter, and, you know, goes to Clarence. Why in the world would Clarence find a need to take this with him on this escape? Why? Why would you take that, but you leave your letters? They grabbed all the letters, which had all the items inside of it, and that's what was shoved inside this pouch. So, and then I go back and I ask this kind of question too about the pouch. So you see the ingenuity that John and Clarence and Frank Morris did on the life preserver. We talked about how long it took, you know, once they found them, even the one that was damaged. After they patch it, you know, it holds air for almost an hour with weights on them. Same thing with the boat. If this pouch was so important to John, and it was because that's what they claim, you know, this pouch was crucial to him. And this is the reason why, you know, we believe he drowned. And if it was all that, then he sure did a piss poor job at putting it together, right? Because according to the Army boat person that found it, it was flooded with water. So he didn't do a very good job if it was that important to him. Sounded to me like whoever put it together didn't really quite know about the vulcanizing, how to vulcanize something. They just, you know, put it together, sewed it together, and threw it in the water. I mean, explain to me how all those letters were still in his cell the next morning. Another mystery. You know?
Yeah, tons of mystery. Well, we got to the morning, so that's good. So, and I think that's really important to understand. And when I read that, I thought that was interesting when they said their goodbyes, you know, that Sunday before. So it's really kind of interesting. But we will next time we will get down to the timeline of the escape.
Get to the water.
Get to the water, because there's some really fascinating things that happen, and there are things, a lot of setbacks that I think the listeners will be really interested in, because it didn't go as planned as they exactly as it planned.
No.
But all right, guys. So until next week, and I know you're going up to this week. You're going to be at. Tell us a little about the event that you're going to be at. This is going to air probably after it, but tell us a little bit about the event that you guys are going to.
Mike?
So on Friday night, well, Ken's going to be flying out from Florida to San Francisco this week. And so the two of us are going to be together promoting the book, Alcatraz, The Last Escape. On Thursday night in San Francisco, we're going to be going to the Commonwealth Club and giving a little talk about the book and doing a little Q&A with an audience. So that's going to be an enjoyable experience. I'm looking forward to that. And then on Friday, we're going to be going to Alcatraz. And there's another podcast, sorry, competition, is going to come out also from Florida. They just happen to be in Florida as well. And they're going to fly out this week, and they're going to do a podcast of us on Alcatraz Island on Friday. So that'll be memorable of, on the spot where it all happened, we get to kind of share our story with them as well.
Cool. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. And, of course, the anniversary is coming up in another week. So perfect timing to do this.
Well, fantastic. Well, hopefully you have great weather up there, because you never know. And, even in the summertime, people think in San Francisco in the summertime, you have good weather.
No.
Well, even John talked about that in his letter, saying on one day it could be 80 degrees and the next day it's 60 degrees and freezing cold. He even commented on the weather, how unpredictable it was.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll have a good time up there, and then we'll talk to you. So next week, here, let me stop recording.